That's noting how it is that the actual physical demands, believe it or not, of the human nervous system and what is commonly known as the brain materially demands that for it to operate there must be thinking from a particular point of view, as we were calling it. If we were operating in another kind of universe, which is just dreamland, it could be put into an equation. But it is a physical demand that there be what would appear to be a distinct point of view for this end of the nervous system to take off and start thinking. That's just simply a fact. It's not normally looked at because from any sort of ordinary two-legged view, if you're standing reasonably looking at it, you can't look at that, which I'm not going into. It would appear to be to ordinary people, even if they followed that, that it becomes some sort of pseudo Zen game that you have to have some point of view to even consider that, and so on and so on. But it is simply a fact. But simultaneously with that is also the fact that thinking from some point of view puts a further restriction on what is already a finite topography, the human brain to start with. So at first blush, assuming that anyone followed that, you've had several hours to think about it. That at first that would sound contradictory. Am I safe in saying that? It would sound as though this is contradictory, and yet reasonable men, upon hearing this, are not all that surprised. And I was slipping this in about reasonable men being surprised because we mentioned that last time, and it is actually amongst others I guess I could make up, but may I suggest to you that that is actually more operationally, more telling phrase than one that we're always confronted with. I say us, the whole world has always been confronted. And this nowadays normally would go by the description of saying something perhaps out of the ordinary, and then the speaker would say, of course, men know this unconsciously. They were playing with this 3,000 years ago in the Western world in the guise of spirits, in the mythological stories of men being taken over by certain fairies and dwarfs and insurance salesmen who were between jobs. But always the idea that men in some way were going through a scenario, through a drama, that they were playing out some sort of unpublished plays that some of the gods had written, and they were sort of staggering through it and doing things that if they could come to their senses and become a reasonable person, someone would say, why in the world would you do this? And then point out the folly, the personal folly of what they're doing, and people go, oh, and by word or deed insinuate that, yeah, I knew that, but you're left with this. Then whoever's telling the story would have to say to the person, well, if you knew that, why did you stagger along and so demoralize, so shortchange yourself? And the person would go, I don't know. And thousands of years ago, and even today in that part of the nervous system time zone of man, there are people who go, well, it's some kind of demonic enemy, or it's the anti-gods, it's the anti-good forces working on me. And those a little more up to city date today would say, literally, that, well, I did know that, but I didn't know it consciously. At the ordinary level, people take that nowadays, and every now and then when we're in a hurry, which is when, I know that it would sound as though we are hitting at the same edge of that. But there's a better way to put it, which I'm suggesting to you now that everyone seems to be almost entirely lost at sea. I'll get you out of this. See, notice if this is ordinary, I'd say I'd get me out of it. But see, I'm going to get you out of it so that you don't feel bad. So that you don't look bad in case the saucer's up there taking some kind of infrared pictures, or in case this again is one of those stupid tests. At least they get your name as, well, he passed. Then you have to figure out what is passing the stupid test. Then they say, not only did he passed with honors. Does passing mean that you got it right, or did you? And they say, that boy deserves a scholarship. Beam him up and put him in those golden chains, or whatever they say on flying saucers. What I wanted you to see was, if you recall where we started out, was that everyone would say that a point of view is necessary. And they could defend themselves as more reasonable and intelligent they were by ordinary standards by saying, as I already did for them last time, they would say, well, I don't mean in a biased, unduly prejudiced manner, but you must have a point of view to even express yourself. You can't talk about politics, you can't talk about religion, you can't talk about anything unless you've got some sort of point of view. And then some smartass comes along and says, well, a point of view, although it's absolutely, physically, de rigueur to even get the brain operating, to crank it up. You don't need an Allstate. You don't need a Delco. You have got to, not a battery, you have got to have a point of view to get this going. Well, that's what I just said. I know you did, but now catch this. Having a point of view is to put an absolute, again, a physical, it is a material, literal fact. You are putting additional restrictions on that which is by its very nature already of a finite dimension. And the ordinary person, again, being foolish enough to assume they followed that, would say, that cannot be both. And yet, what I told you was that that is a first digit on one hand. People are not surprised to hear that. Now, so I'm going to get you out of it. I'm going to show you how. And when I said not surprised, let me go ahead and give the example. And then we'll go back to me trying to get you to see that saying that people are not surprised to hear absolutely from one view unreasonable, illogical, contradictory matters, which they hear. I'm not the first one to ever present this. It happens mechanically out in life. And I'm going to show you so that you don't think you're completely lost. In a very crude fashion, ordinary people, life has them doing it, push on the bars, push on the limitations of the restrictions of a point of view. Very common one. I'll put it in a contemporaneous context, but it's as old as the history of man, which is as old as man's brain talking. A politician, in the passion of some important matter, will say, all right, he's addressing the Senate or he's on TV, but he will say, all right, I am now not speaking simply as a Democrat, I'm speaking as an American. Now, you don't ever think about that, but do you hear what they're doing without them knowing it? They are, that is, in this instance, and I can make up more, I can repeat more, I don't have to make them up. They are, without knowing it, acknowledging the fact that the point of view, let's take the first one, that I'm a Democrat or a Republican or a socialist, it doesn't matter, that's not the point. What they are tacitly saying is, my normal point of view is limited. Do you hear? I mean, that's not any kind of political analyzation on my part. They're saying, they're admitting, my normal point of view, I normally operate here in the halls of the Senate, I operate as a good Democrat. And what they're saying is, but this matter is too important for me to have that kind of parochial view, for me to stay by those ordinary limitations. No, we must press on. Now, I am speaking not as a Democrat, but we could be in other contexts. A man could be saying, I am now not speaking as a Baptist. This is too important a moral matter. I'm speaking as a Christian. And if he was really up to date, he might say, I'm not only speaking not any longer as a Baptist, too limited. I'm not just speaking as a Christian, a little bit bigger, but not big enough. I am speaking as just a religious person. They are admitting it is a known fact without them knowing it. But now I want to back up. I assume that you do see it happens all the time. It happens in social occasions. It is not simply tied to institutional examples of religion or politics. People are continually doing it. People do it on a one-to-one basis that they will, it normally comes out as being a direct inference that I am now, by what I'm about to say, I'm talking to somebody else now. I am now, from what I'm about to say, I am expanding my horizons. I'm expanding my view of you. People do it to each other socially. Sexual partners do it like, well, now I used to be very, very, you recall, I've been probably extremely jealous to the point that perhaps we've had physical confrontations wherein your nose danced with my knuckles. But I realize our relationship means more to me than to let this sort of thing, blah, blah, blah. It's the same thing as saying, I am now not speaking simply as a Democrat. I'm speaking as an American. But see, under ordinary conditions, routine conditions, if this man, the politician, the religious person, or somebody just in a social context, what they're saying is, normally, my point of view of being a Democrat is first class. That's all I need. But because of the somewhat out of the ordinary circumstance, I must push at the normal restrictions. But you don't normally think about being that way. So if I took that example, took a first-class politician, man with a high school education, and I said, all right, did you hear what I was talking about point of view and how it's necessary for the brain to operate, and yet, by its very nature, simultaneously, it puts on restrictions on that which is already restricted enough? And the man went, yeah, I heard that. You probably thought it didn't make any sense. No, it didn't. All right, did you hear what I just pointed out about the example that I heard you do? That you said, I'm not speaking today as a Democrat, I'm speaking as an American. And he went, yeah. And I said, don't you see the connection? If he was reasonable enough, and I could get him away by himself, what I'm telling you is he would not be all that surprised. That is what people normally want to say is, well, all right, now I'm speaking for ordinary people. Ordinary minds of our contemporary times would say, all right, he unconsciously realized the validity of what you're saying. Look at it another way. As you know, now it's not to attack psychology, that's not the point. But there is a more descriptive way to look at it that is much more informative for someone attempting to be informed. Not educated, not finish high school, you can do that in your spare time. To say that someone is not surprised, a reasonable man can hear something as unreasonable as this started out, is absolutely self-contradictory to say that the ordinary workings of the brain has got to have a point of view to have its first thought. But as soon as it has a point of view, that first thought is already new limits on what was initially, to start with, a finite topography, a finite operation. That is, we would be charitable to call that self-contradictory. It's just insane. And yet I'm telling you that a reasonable man could hear that under the right conditions, not anything all that weird, and go, yeah. And what you're left with, forget that, well, he unconsciously knew it. Here is what I want you to see when I say that a reasonable man is not surprised. A reasonable man, being simply an outlet for life, for the growth of life, can hear this because the point is life knew this. It's not some surprise that me or somebody else could spring on life. Come on. So life knew it, but life did not know that this one guy might could hear it. And so it comes out, and under reasonable conditions, a man who would not normally ever think of such a thing. Never. He's not supposed to. It's no attack on him, but he would never think of this. And you can whip it on him. That's psychological talk. You could whip it on him, and a reasonable man under reasonable conditions can go, huh, yeah. Which is actually, in a way, shocking because he never, ever, did you say never, ever? Yes. Never, ever would have thought of that. Again, not that he should, but he would have never thought about it, and yet he can hear it. But it's not that he unconsciously knew it because he would have never known it. But he can hear it in a sense if it's just put on him in the right way, just if it was by accident, and not be surprised. That was a long sidestep. But some of you should be able to use that because you are continually confronted, and I know you want to do it with yourself, and the most common term is, the most common description out in the city, the currency is to say that, all right, somebody suddenly admitted that they understood something that they never understood, or somebody claimed that their behavior up until point X had been aberrant and self-destructive, and they saying, suddenly I see the light. And people want to analyze it, ordinary people. Because some ordinary people, that's their phony baloney job doing that. It's part of their duties in life. It's a cheap shot at baloney makers. And so the mind wants to go, just good intellectual, educated, sophisticated people in the city now, they want to go, well, why is this? Why do people do things? Why will they admit I have been living an unproductive life? I have been taking drugs. I've been drinking too much. I have been harming my body. Whatever. I've been harming my soul, my spirit, whatever they say. And then something will happen and they say, ah. And sometimes they'll attribute it to just one statement. They'll say, I just picked up a pamphlet on the street. I reached over and looked at, and I was drunk, and I looked down at a matchbook cover and it says, get your high school diploma at home. And it was like I suddenly came to my senses. And you think, well, this doesn't make any sense. If you knew that, the man says, of course, I was being silly. It says, if you're reading this in the gutter, you're probably a drunk. And the man goes, and it made me come to my senses, and I thought, I got to stop this. All right. You being a reasonable person, you could think, well, wait a minute. Why has this man been a laying down in the gutter, kind of good old North Carolina drunk for 48 years? Is that, yeah, 49, he said, 49 years. And how is it just suddenly glancing down and seeing this that he says that I went through my moment of enlightenment? And you go, well, what is this? All right, the ordinary view. The more sophisticated view now wouldn't be that, Jesus or Elvis said, straighten up. It would be that, all right, how did he suddenly realize the error of his ways after this time? And you go, well, it's not that he suddenly realized it. He unconsciously knew it all along. Now, that is just an accepted buffet in the intellectual world of the city now that people, they go, well, that's the only way to explain it, because it's not from the ordinary view today. And we consider the ordinary view to be evolutionary time zone somewhere beyond religious nowadays. I'm speaking now for the city, the more sophisticated side of ordinary life that would look at psychological as opposed to a demonic battle for a man's soul. And they'd go, well, all right, it's not that Matchbox did it, or he didn't just turn on TV in a cheap motel room and suddenly Billy Graham was there going, shame on you, and they went, ooh, now I realize. They would say, it wasn't that. The man unconsciously knew he shouldn't be doing this. But then you're left with, wait a minute. How can a man unconsciously go 49 years killing himself and suddenly turning on a cheap black and white set and hearing Billy Graham go, oh, shame on you. What the hell kind of sense does that make? You can't say that man's reasonable. I am suggesting to you a useful way to look at it is instead of that they unconsciously knew, or that people unconsciously know what they're doing, or people have some kind of collective or mass or individual unconscious mind that knows what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, look at it another way. Because it's not playing with words, but look at it another way, because you cannot take the information of the city that's already been chewed and regurgitated and chewed back up. The collective of what they know in the city is no longer descriptive. Just look at it this way. The kinds of things that are more complex information, reasonable men can hear it and not be surprised, as opposed to, well, he unconsciously knew it. Now, they can hear it under the right conditions and not be all that surprised. Leave it at that. And the reason is because, what the hell, life knew that. Forget about this drunk. Forget about some man. Life knows what it's doing. And so for life to be the great glove filled with the eternal goo, and to have all these little 15 billion little pinpricks, and each one being one man's brain, I say 15 billion, we're talking about reasonable men. All right, 7.5 billion little pinprick. And for, one to get mashed over here, and it happens to be this reasonable man's little hole there in the glove, and somebody mashes it accidentally, and it comes out saying, a point of view is necessary, and yet by its own nature is limiting. He goes, It's not that he knew that unconsciously, but hey, a reasonable man can hear it and not be all that surprised, because where did it come from? I mean, he didn't discover it. Life already knew it. Just life didn't know that there was going to be some occasion that this little fucker might find out or hear about it and go, I didn't know that. But he's not surprised. He doesn't go, oh, no. At first blush, he may go, that's insane. which is normally how the revolution passes by people. Well, that's just nuts, so they just don't hear it. But under the right conditions, which there's no point to this, that is, for me to say that there should be conditions. But what I'm telling you is the information in the revolution, which is simply life tomorrow, people can hear it under the right conditions, that under other conditions, they would go, good God, that's nuts. Or if you went up beside them and you played another part and you say, and you suddenly put on a mustache and you said, did you hear what that guy just said about point of view being necessary to get the brain going? Yeah, yeah. But at the same time, it's limiting factor. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Have you ever heard anything so nuts? And the same guy would go, Jesus, no. Let's get out of here. Except if you stepped up another way, as I said, under the same guy, and go, damn. Do you get that? The guy go, yeah, I guess that is true. You understand? That ordinarily a person would go, if they listened at all, if it was forced on their attention, would go, no, that's nuts. That's impossible. Which in a polarized, energizing of a three-dimensional world, it is impossible. Not the reality of it, but for that which is being run by polarized energy to look at it and to stand on its own 2 feet. For those of you that didn't care for that Kyroot, oh, I know it wasn't that you didn't care for it, but to stand on one's own 2 feet is a reasonable, it's not an untoward, physical boast. But for one raised in the city, it is a neural nightmare. Because to stand on your own 2 feet is what? It's to be one of those little donkeys walking down the... You stand on your own 2 feet. Yes, I'm my own man. We're not talking about physically, sir. Because everybody's got a cousin that can whip somebody else. He says, nah, I don't mean stand on my own 2 feet physically. I can stand on my own 2 feet intellectually. What I know, what I believe, what I trust in. Which is, and he stands on his left foot, which your brain, that's why you got 2 lobes. So those of you that don't know it, they call it lobes, and I've gone along with it all these years. It's your left and right foot at the neural end. Don't go run home and try to pull out a high school book on physiology. I just made that up. Just to stand on one foot is to have a point of view. And so to say I stand on my own 2 feet, that's okay for a physical boast. You know, if you're a weightlifter or you're getting ready to do the broad jump. But to say I stand on my own 2 feet intellectually, Jesus, you're having nightmares and don't even know it. Because to stand on your own 2 feet, one foot says, I know what I'm doing. Another foot agrees that, yes, I'm the foot that doesn't know. That in this case, all right, did you believe that the Democrats should take over the White House? And the guy leans the weight to his left foot. He's standing on both feet. You don't stand on just one, but he leans it on his left foot because that says yes. But the only reason he knows he's standing on his left foot is he's got a right foot that says, no, the Republicans should stay. It's the nature of polarized energy. It's the nature of a point of view. I was going to say back to the main topic. What in God's name was the main topic? You see, we're so short to end the clock, I thought maybe I could drag out this piece of business. Well, there was a Kyroot last time that said that although the thinking of the collective is indispensable, it is not sufficient. And this area covers a whole multitude of the collective point of view. At any particular time, and without going into examples of what a point of view would be in any particular part of the world, at any particular time, for any particular group, it's to simply see that wherever you are, it's not even the point, and I'm not going to stay on that because it doesn't matter what faction of religion, what political party, it is that the collective of life, the civilized, the civilians, the ordinary, the people that keep the whole planet going, their collective thought is indispensable. And it's only the anomalous blisters on the pigs. I guess that's enough profanity for one take. Only the anomalous who think that the collective thought of man is in some way too dogmatic, too parochial. It's only the insignificant, only the part-time player rebel out in the streets that is railing against ordinary people and middle-class bourgeoisie moralities and limited thinking. They're just part of the game. No particular great part, as you will notice. Because the collective, whatever the collective is thinking in your area, but just look at it worldwide, it's no longer of any particular value to even stay on one area of life, of the planet. But on this planet now, let's consider that everyone has, to some degree, has their own secondary world activated. That everybody on this planet has their nervous system talking. So at that level, the collective thought of the planet is indispensable. And you're just wasting your time, if you're trying to do something extraordinary, to have any resistance, to entertain any inner resistance to whatever the collective thought is. Because whatever it is, it doesn't matter. No matter how quickly it changes, no matter how it seems to contradict itself, whatever it is indispensable, comma. But it's insufficient. It is again at one of those beautiful crossroads, unless you happen to be Robert Johnson. That it's more than self-contradictory. If you can hear it, it's the kind of thing that a revolutionist can use as an energy to run with, to realize simultaneously that what the common knowledge, what the collective wisdom at this particular moment of the planet or any area, if you can't do that, if you just take whatever area, if you take the political climate of where you live, if you were more involved with affairs religious, of whatever your particular faction or church, but whatever the collective thinking is indispensable, comma. Or if you like, let's really dramatize it. Is indispensable, period. Second verse. But whatever they're thinking is insufficient. An ordinary mind, what I was trying to get you to consider, again would take this, perhaps they would say that we're getting a little trickier with it, trying to cloud their minds. Is that a shadow I see? Lamont Cranston. They could say you're trying to trick me because that's the same thing. You're just, it's self-contradictory, but it just doesn't sound like that you're using antithetical terms. You're not saying, all right, you got to have a point of view to think, but if you got a point of view, you can't think as well. Now, that's easy to spot. I caught you on that. But this one, you're trying to trick us because you're saying that what the collective thinks is indispensable, and yet it's insufficient. That's a subtle attempt to trick me again. Ah, the stupid test again. It can be, without any doubt, it's not that hard to see that something could be indispensable and not be sufficient. And we're back where I was insinuating as a quite attractive and pleasant crossing of different lines, because this is, again, being the incomplete nervous system creatures that man is, again, where there is a continual dust storm, fist raised, figuratively speaking, of people arguing, wrangling over ideas, because one group is always saying, and it's just according to the view, that group would have a view of somebody else, but some group in the collective has a view that, all right, what we're doing politically, economically, socially, what we're doing is what should be done. We are reasonable men, are we not? And they all go, yes, we are. And they say, how can this other group over here, how in God's name, how for the sake of Allah's grandparents, can you people be against this? And if you're an outside observer, And if you could be a reasonable man with no particular point of view, you could go, that is weird. How can these two groups of otherwise apparently reasonable people, how can this group of Protestants in Northern Ireland, how can this group of Catholics, how can this group of Christians and this group of even additional Christians in Lebanon, how can anything that you can point out, how can this go on? And in all other respects, these two groups collectively seem to be reasonable men. It's because from one view, from one of the collective views, what they're thinking, that is what they're saying is their theories and their ideas of how things should go, what they're thinking to them is indispensable. That's it. Except when that's their point of view, the indispensable does become synonymous with the sufficient. In other words, they say we must live like this. We have got to be, and fill it in. We've got to be good Catholics. We cannot any longer live like this. The rest of you got to realize we got to be good Muslims. We got to be good Shiites. We got to be good whatevers. Another group, they might see from one view, if I could grab them and make them unusually reasonable for a second, would go, all right, we're not complaining with just what you said, but keep going. Don't stop there. That's not enough. But when you have a point of view, when you're operating on the basis of polarized energy running your three-dimensional closet, then that which is indispensable is by its very nature sufficient. You're back to the old, if I can trick you, back to what you know by knowledge. You can prove to yourself anytime you want to, is you do not think more than you have to. You can always be more alert than you are. But you got to try to do it. And if you don't do it, whatever to you is indispensable. If somebody says, all right, I want your opinion on this. Now I mean it. You go, all right, rah, 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 rah. And they say, now are you serious? That's what you say. You say, what I've told you is indispensable for your problem. You have got to take this attitude. And they go, well, thank you so much, or else they go, hey, stuff it. You're nuts. But see, what you're saying is, as long as you got a point of view, and you're just doing that, the minimally required to get you by, which is, to ordinary thinking, the maximum, at least the point of absolute efficiency. Because if you're, Julio Goldfarb, who knows better what Julio Goldfarb should be thinking and doing than you? And if you say, wait a minute, did you give that enough thought? I ask your opinion. You're my close friend, Julio. Is that what you really think? You go, hey, why would I hold out on you? That's what I think. That is the point of view. He is saying that is indispensable. You wanted my view? I gave it to you. What is unsaid is, wait a minute, is that the only possible view you got? Hey, if it is not thought from some extraordinary way, that which is taken, that which is given as being indispensable is also taken and given as being sufficient. And it's not. It's impossible. And thus you have what is commonly known as, you remember the Kyroot, or that reality that turned to one of his buds after he'd set creation, and he says, I can see already we can expect some conflicts among those groups. Realities have a way of understating things. Because as long as the collective thought, which is always based on a point of view, as long as it is given with no additional thought, then it is indispensable. That's the only thought the guy's got. I mean, you must say it's indispensable. If somebody says, is that your opinion? You go, yes. I'm serious. Is that your opinion on this? I said it was. I mean, it's my only opinion. What do you want? You want me to lie to you? No. Then that's my opinion. So that was indispensable. That was his opinion. But the unspoken part, the tacit, the operationally silent part is that that's sufficient. Except to most everybody else, or at least to some of the people, it is not sufficient. And thus you have what is commonly referred to as a certain degree of conflict. Bye.